During the tragic period when there was a fierce machloikis, a fierce not only debate and dispute but fight between the Misnagdim and the Hasidim, the opponents to Hasidim and the Hasidim in the late 1700s. It is well known that the Vilna Gaon signed a cherem, he signed a ban against the Hasidim based on the testimony and the suspicion that the new movement of the Baal Shem Tov might, heaven forbid, lead the Jewish people once again astray and away from the Messiah, the tradition of Torah and Halacha. A delegation came to the Ga'ana Gahoinim, Reb Chaim Volozhiner. Reb Chaim Volozhiner was the rabbi of the Lithuanian city of Volozhin. He would later found there the mother of so many Lithuanian yeshivas, the famous Volozhiner yeshiva. But Reb Chaim Volozhiner was also the Talmud Muvik, probably the greatest student of the Vilna Gaon. And they came to Reb Chaim to ask Reb Chaim Volozhiner to sign, to join his own Rebbe signing the ban. But you could look up the cherem and you'll see many signatures are there, not Reb Chaim Volozhiner's. So there's a story about it. Some say attribute the story to another Talmud of the Vilna Gaon, Reb Rafal of Hamburg, others to Reb Chaim Volozhiner, but the insight, I think, is what matters most. They asked Reb Chaim Volozhiner, why would you not sign the ban, the cherem? And Reb Chaim Volozhiner refused, he didn't want to. So they said, but your own Rebbe, the Vilna Gaon, and who like Reb Chaim Volozhiner appreciated, cherished, and respected the Vilna Gaon, as you know from the introductions of Reb Chaim Volozhiner and his writings about the Vilna Gaon. Reb Chaim still refused. So they quoted the Gemara in Chagigah that Rabbi Lankry just quoted. The Gemara brings the pasuk in Malachi, Sifsei koyin yishmeru das, v'toyre yivakshu mipiyu ki malach Hashem tzvagoisu. Rabbi Lankry attributed it to me. What he meant in my case was as nishka mensch. When you say somebody is a malach, you say my son is a malach, my husband is a malach, right? A wife once told another woman, my husband is a malach. She says, you're lucky, mine is still alive. Another wife told somebody else, my husband is a malach. She said, I know what you mean, mine is a mensch. And mine is also not a human being, he's an angel. There was once a rabbi who would always preach to the congregation about the need to respect and embrace and love children and be sensitive to them. And once they paved his alleyway with a new layer of concrete. And of course, children, when they see concrete newly paved, they feel they have to make an imprint in the world wherever they go. So they, of course, begin dancing hakafas on the new paved alleyway, imprinting their names and their initials and messages and mottos and slangs and Super Bowl Sunday, whatever. And the rabbi comes out and begins hollering, screaming at these chutzpah, these spoiled brats, these audacious kids who have nothing better to do. And the Rebbitzin, his wife, hears her husband screaming. She comes out and she sees her husband yelling at these poor, frightened kids. She says, my dear husband, I don't understand you. Every Shabbos you get up to the pulpit and you tell the congregation how they have to be sensitive and respectful to children. And here you're screaming and hollering at these kids. So the rabbi looks at his wife and he says, I love children in the abstract, not in the concrete. So there's a malach there's a malach and there is a malach. They asked Reb Chaim Volozhiner, Your Rebbe is the Chamalach Hashem Tzvakos, an angel of God, the Gvilna God. How would you not sign a document that he signs? Listen to his response. He said in the story of the Akedah, at the end of Parshas Vayera, Vahi acher advarim ha'ele v'alekim nisa es Avram v'yomer elav Avram v'yomer ineni v'yomer kachna es binch. The Rebbeinu Shalom Hashem turns to Avram and commands him to take his child and offer Yitzchak as an offering to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Avram Avinu goes and he builds an altar and he ties up Yitzchak on the altar. Vayishlach Avram es yadei vayikach sam ha'acheles tishchet es bnai. He takes the sword. He's about to slaughter his own son. Vayikra elav malach Hashem min hashamayim vayomer elav Avram Avram vayomer ineni vayomer al tishlach yadcha el anar. An angel of God calls out and says, Avram, he says, hineni, and the angel says, don't lay a finger on the lad. Yitzchak's life is spared. Asked Ohr Chaim Valoshin, and I don't understand. When God summons him to take his son and offer him as an offering, who approaches Avram Avinu? Hashem himself. V'ha'elokim nises Avram. God comes and tests him and says, Avram, take your child and bring him as an offering. Who do we expect should now instruct him to take Yitzchak off the altar and not lay a finger on him? Hashem. No. The one who changes this position is a Malach Elikim. Vayikra elav Malach Hashem min hashamayim. Why? Zok Reb Chaim Valoshener, and I have to say this in Yiddish and then I'll translate. He says, B'shas der Eibishter will, a du sollst nicht schechten a Yiddish Kind, kann schicken a Malach. Aber Eib der Rebbeinu Shalom will, a du sollst schechten a Yiddish Kind, kann nicht schicken kein Malach. Man hat sich nicht zu keinem Malach. Darf kommen allein. If God is telling you to spare the life of a Jewish child, an angel suffices. But if the creator of the world wants that you should take a child and slaughter him, an angel would not do the trick. We would not listen to angels. He must appear himself and tell you that message. My Rebbe, he said, is a Malach Hashem Tzvakos, no question. An angel of God he is. But if God wants me to slaughter a Jew, he has to come himself, not send an angel. And his signature does not appear over there. And that's really what is so moving about this Mesibah. What's moving about this evening tonight is that after decades in which fragmentation and disunity plagued the Jewish world and the Jewish religious world, we are now observing a new horizon where we are maturing and understanding if you're going to slaughter another Jew, verbally or emotionally, psychologically or physically, financially or spiritually, don't rely on angels. If you're going to kiss another Jew, if you're going to embrace another Jew, if you'll do a favor to another Jew, if you'll unite with another Jew, there's plenty of angels who will support it. But if you're going to Shecht Ayid, make sure you heard it directly from God. And I don't know if there's anybody around today in Monsey or in Williamsburg, in Crown Heights or in Lakewood, in Bnei Brak or in Meir Sha'arim, in Chicago or in Toronto, who is listening and hearing directly from God a message. I once heard a speaker get up and, as usual among Jews, it was quite noisy, and he says, I'm hearing voices and I'm not a prophet. Voices we hear. We all hear voices. Prophets, I don't know. We're seeing a new horizon. And that is a great moment. And I want to tell you something that occurred actually on this night. It was Yud Shevat, 10th of Shevat. I was a young child. It was the year 1980, Tovshin Mem. 1980, the Lubavitcher Rebbe was commemorating the 30th yartziet of his father-in-law, of the Rebbe Rayatz, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, and there was a large farbrengen, a large gathering at 770 Eastern Parkway, and a unique, prominent guest showed up at that farbrengen, Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik. Hagon, Rabbi Yosef Doiv Halevi, Rabbi J.B. Soloveitchik, who was the chief rabbi of Boston, Rosh Hashiva of Yeshivas Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan, a son of Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik, who was the oldest son of Rabbi Chaim, Rabbi Chaim Brisker, Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, Schusam Yogan Aleinu. He showed up at the Farbrengen. He was supposed to stay for 20 minutes. I think he stayed for 2 hours, till after the Hadron that the Rebbe made on 4 Masechtas, Brachas, Nazir, Yevamis, and Krisus. Rabbi Daniel is making a Hadron next Tuesday on Yevamis. But he'll tell you that the Siyum of Yevamis exists in another 3 Masechtas, Brachas, Nazir, and Krisus. Talmid Chacham Marbim Shalom Ba'olam. The Ohr Chaim says Rosh Tevis Bonayich, Brachas, Nazir, Yevamis, Krisus. At that Farbrengen Yud Shevat, you know, Chabad has a Litvish component to it. Although people don't know that, the Balatanya they used to call the Litvak. When he came to Maga, they called him because he was the most Litvak of all of his friends. They came from Poland, from other places. He was a real Litvak, and you see from the Shulchan Aruch that he was more Litvak than a lot of Litvaks, with all of his Bamed Dvarim Amurims. So the Balatanya, yeah. So the Aruch Lenei writes, Banayich is brachas, Nazir Yevamis Krisus. So the Rebbe, even though by Chassidim, it's not a question that at a yartziet you take out tikkun, you throw a feast. By the Litvish, it's not so pashut with a yartziet, right? Is it a fast day? Not. So because of the Litvish component at the core of Chabad, at every yartziet the Rebbe used to make a siyum mesechta, so it should be a sudas mitzvah pi halacha. So to go out from all pikpukim, so even Yud Shevat, which was the yartziet of his own father-in-law, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, he made a siyum. That year, Yud Shevat, where Rabbi Soloveitchik was there, he was Messiah 4 Masechtas, Banayich, Brachas, Nazir, Yevamis, Krisus. He told me, Rabbi Yehuda Berman, Julius Berman, who was the head of the OU many years, and Claims Conference, and learned by Rabbi Soloveitchik many years. So when he came to me, Menachem Avil, our family, after my father, Olav Shalom's passing, he told us a very interesting story. He said the next day, he went in to Rabbi Soloveitchik, to his Rebbe. And he says, Rebbe, the Welt sagt, the world is saying, as Nechten Banacht, hat der Vilna Gaon gemacht Shalom mit der Balatanya. The world is saying that last night the Vilna Gaon made peace with the Balatanya. Because the Lubavitcher Rebbe was a grandson, of course, of the Balatanya. The name Schneer's son, which was adopted by the Tzemach Tzedek, the grandson of Balatanya, is Schneer's son, sons of Schneer. Just a little Jewish trivia. As children of Schneer, Rebbe Schneer Zalman, the Alter Rebbe, the Balatanya. Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik was a grandson of Reb Chaim, so it's the Soloveitchik family, which represented the la creme of Lita, and in its Reb Chaim Volozhin, which is from Talmidei Hagra. So Rabbi Yoshe Ber comes to Chabad to 770. So in heaven, finally the Gaon made peace with the Tanya. He told me Rabbi Yoshe Ber took a look at him and said, Nei. Sie haben schon gemacht Shalom in Auschwitz. The full real peace was already made 4 decades ago in Auschwitz. And what Rabbi Soloveitchik meant, of course, to say was that in the great debates of the Jewish world, of this shita, that shita, this ideology or that ideology, in that horrific camp of death, which was just liberated 70 years ago, this very week, in January 1945, there was absolutely no difference. Not only between a chassid and a misnagid, but between a right-winger and a left-winger, even between a believer and an atheist, between a capitalist and a communist, between somebody who was ultra religious and somebody who was ultra secular, but if there was Jewish blood flowing in your sinews, in the mind of Goebbels, Mengele, and Rosenberg, Yimach Shemam, you were as Jewish as the Chafetz Chaim, as the Vilna Gaon, as the Baal Shem Tov, as the Arizal, as the Beis Yosef. So tonight, after this, in Yiddish there's an expression, Ederich gei reden will ich sagen a paar Wörter. Before I'm going to speak, I want to say a few words, and most rabbis are still busy saying their few words. I say this as an opening remark to the great moment, and I'm not speaking only about this shul or this event or this night, but a general trend that I think many of us are observing in recent times in Klal Yisrael, that we realized, especially when faced with the threats that the Jewish people are faced today around Israel and the world at large, that our greatest calamity to ourselves can be inner divisiveness. And our greatest blessing and power is true unity and love. And this community is, I think, an embodiment of that spirit, of that energy, of that tremendous holiness, of that sensitivity, and of that respect. And for this I say to the whole Ohr Chaim community, Yiratzon Shetishra Shchina, B'maisei Yadeichem, to link hearts and souls and bond Jews and unite them with a tremendous achdus, with a tremendous love and oneness. Tonight is the 65th yartziet of the Rebbe Rayatz, the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe. He told me a Monsey. So a Jew, he lives in Brooklyn. His name is Reb Mendel Baumgarten. And in the 40s, he davened in a shul in Bronzeville. Some of you still know about the neighborhood Bronzeville, but every other Jew somehow lived in Bronzeville, or their uncle lived in Bronzeville, until the mass exodus to suburbia. And this Mendel Baumgarten, who's today an Elte Yid, a Chabadsker, would come to shul. Then he was a bach, he was a teenager, a child, a bacher. And there was a Jew in shul who would always mock Lubavitch in the 40s and mock the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe Rayatz. He always had a snidey, negative remark of cynicism about him. One Shabbos, this Jew gets up in shul, gives a clap on the bimah, and says, I want to publicly ask Mechila forgiveness from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. This is the Rayatz in the 40s. I made a mistake. I regret it. I want to do tshuva. After davening, Reb Mendel Baumgarten approaches the Jew and says, what happened? Makara, tell me what happened. So I'll tell you the mice. What happened was, a little while ago, I fell ill. And the illness was a serious illness, and I needed a lot of money for medical expenses. And all of my money and all of my savings I had to give away. And I was completely broke. Completely. So what does a Jew do when he's broke? There were then many Yiddish newspapers. There were Yiddish dailies and weeklies that were read by hundreds of thousands of Jews because the immigrant generation knew Yiddish. I put in an ad in one of the Yiddish newspapers. I think it was the Morgen Journal. Some of you remember the Morgen Journal? This is before the Allgemeine. The Morning Journal. The Morning Journal. A lot of you Zaydis read it loyally. It was their Bible. Either the Farvitz or the Tug or the Americana or the Morgen Journal. And he puts in an ad. So what should he write? So he puts in a little ad and he says, Ayid daf hilf. A Jew needs help with a telephone number. How many people you think called me? If you would see an ad in a newspaper, Ayid darf Hilf with a telephone number, what would you tell yourself? Ich darf euch Hilf. Und mein Schwieger darf Hilf, Emesse Hilf. Right? And my son's Rebbe darf Hilf, and my rabbi darf Hilf, and my therapist darf Hilf, and my wife darf Hilf, and everyone needs Hilf with a telephone number. What am I supposed to do? And you know, today's newspaper is tomorrow's garbage. Newspapers are dispensables. He says a day goes by, not a single telephone call, another day. Ain't call wie eine. A few days later, I get a call. Who's on the phone? A secretary from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. What does he ask me? He says the Rebbe called me in. He says he saw a little ad in the Morgen Journal. Ayid darf Hilf. A Jew needs help. He wants to know, was soll Hilf darfst du? What type of help do you need? I told him. And he sent me the money I needed. That's why I asked Mechila this Shabbos. That's why I asked forgiveness. A simple but profound story. A little ad. Ayid daf Hilf, a Jew needs help. But a Rebbe, a shepherd, a Manig Yisrael, a mentor, takes the time, calls the number, and finds out what type of help this stranger needs. And I think this is an appropriate opening to the theme I want to address this evening. Rav Lankri Shlita spoke of Kriyas Yamsuf, because I think there's something in the life story of the Baal HaYartziet, of the 6th Rebbe of Lubavitch and his successor, who assumed the leadership of Chabad also on Yud Shevat, on the 10th of Shvat, in 1951, 1 year after the yartziet, the passing of his father, Shabbos Bo Yud Shevat. Whoops. I think there is a message for each of us, whether you're a Chabadnik, whether you're not a Chabadnik, whether you're connected to Chabad or completely disconnected. But I think there's a lesson and a message in one of its perspectives that relates to every Jew living today. I saw a mysterious vart. I'll tell you which sefer. It's a strange sefer. It's an interesting sefer. Ramasayim Tzoifim, a commentary on Tana Devei Yo Zuta by Reb Shmuel Shinever, and he says there in Ramasayim Tzoifim a conversation he had with the Chidushei Harim. The Chidushei Harim, Reb Itche Meir of Ger, was the first Ger Rebbe. And the Ramasayim Tzoifim spells a conversation he had with him. He said, I went to the Chidushei Harim. He said, I went into Botei Gavoy, I went into his inner chamber, his inner house, and I asked him the following question. Why is it that when the Torah speaks about the splitting of the sea, the term that is used is Bikiyas Hayam, Vayiboku Amayim. The sea split. Pekia. But when Chazal refer to the miracle, how do we refer to the miracle? Kriyas Yamsuf. Why don't we call it Bikiyas Yamsuf? The splitting of the sea. Why not use the Lashon HaTorah? Nowhere does it say in Chumash Kriyas Yamsuf. It's always Bikiyas Yamsuf. We have it also in davening. V'Yamsuf Lahem Bakata, based on the Chumash. But when Chazal refer to the miracle, until today, when we speak about it in all the Svarim, it's Kriyas Yamsuf, which literally means the tearing of the sea. Gemara in Pesachim Daf Kuf Yud Ches, you have Kashin Mizoynois of Shaladam, Ke Kriyas Yamsuf. Gemara in Soita Daf Beis, Kashin Zivugim, Ke Kriyas Yamsuf. A Shidduch is as difficult as Kriyas Yamsuf. Why Kriyas Yamsuf? The Chidushei Harim told him, interestingly, there's a lot to say. I have a lot to say about this, but they're not giving me permission. Later he tells Reb Shmuel Shinover, that Pekiya means one entity that's split. Kriya means two entities. As we know from Hilchas Shabbos, more than this I can't say. And that's the end of the Torah. Im shagisi, if what I say now is an error, Hashem yechaper. But I want, perhaps with a little chutzpah and with the koyach harabim, suggest one possible perspective to excavate the depths of what the Chidush Harim was saying. And although he said they didn't give him permission to reveal, we of course would not know why and what would have he revealed. But I want to offer a possible suggestion, Vim Shagisi Hashem Yechaper Ba'adi. What did the Chidush Harim mean? Pekiya is one entity, Kriya is two entities, like you see in Hilchas Shabbos. I think what the Chidush Harim was referring to was a parenthesis in Shulchan Aruch Harav, Siman Shin Mem Seif Yud Zayin. A little background. There's a major problem in Rambam, a major contradiction in Rambam Hilchas Shabbos, and the same is true in the Shulchan Aruch of the Mechaber, in the laws of Shabbos, Siman Shin Mem. And the issue is as follows. One of the 39 labors forbidden on Shabbos is koireya, the opposite of toifer. I'm not allowed to sew on Shabbos, and I'm not allowed to tear on Shabbos. And it's one of the 39 prototypes of labors forbidden. Says the Rambam in Hilchas Shabbos, quoted by the Shulchan Aruch and Siman Shin Mem, that if somebody takes nayoris dvukin, hakireya nayoris dvukin, if there are papers that are glued together, attached to each other, and you separate them, you tear them apart, you transgress the malacha we call kireya. Just like toifer means you took two things and you sewed them together, you connected them. Kireya is the opposite. You take two papers. Niyara is dvukin, that's the expression. You tear them apart, that's the malacha of kireya. Seems simple. And this is a Rambam in Hilchas Shabbos and Perek Yud. What's the problem? The problem is, in the previous halacha, the same Mechaber of Shulchan Aruch from Rambam brings another halacha. HaKoreya Nayar, if somebody rips a paper, right? So if the reason you're tearing the paper, or whatever substance it is kidei lasis mimenu lishtamish ba'eze tashmish, you want to use it for something. You need this paper to cover something, to wipe something. You're tearing something in order to use it for a practical purpose. So you're turning it into a keli. It's mesake mana. It's asr. Everybody wonders, why not kireya? Why is this not kireya? You just told me that if there's two papers attached and you tear them, it's kireya. So now if I tear a piece of paper and I use it for something purposeful, it's a malacha. Why? Because of tikkun mana. Why is it not a malacha? Because of kireya I'm tearing. And you see in Rambam, one is in Perek Chav Gimel and one is in Perek Yud. One is in a section of Minatoiris and one is in a section of Midirabbanan. Because tikkun mana is a din here Midirabbanan. If you're going to use it for something purposeful, it's a rabbinic prohibition. But you're tearing it. And even if you're tearing it for something purposeful, why doesn't the Rambam say there's an Isur Kireya? And the Mechaber has it together in Shulchan Aruch with a blatant contradiction. Here the Isur is you're fixing a vessel, you're creating a vessel, and here the Isur is tearing. So the Shulchan Aruch Harav, the Alter Rebbe, the Balatanya Shulchan Aruch and Siman Shin Mem, I think it's Yud Zayin, has a parenthesis. You remember the parentheses? He writes, to answer this question without addressing it, He says a chidush davar. What's his chidush? Koireya only exists if you're separating two distinct entities that were connected. But if something is one entity and you tear it, there's no problem of koireya. That's not called tearing. And therefore, if I take a piece of plastic, let's say I have a magazine, a new magazine, and it's covered with plastic. Or I have a piece of paper on the table on Shabbos, one piece of paper. Says the Baal HaTanya, if I just tear it like this, not two napkins that are connected, one piece of naya, and I just tear it on Shabbos, there's no koireya. Why is there no koireya? I wasn't separating two entities. So is it a problem on Shabbos? Depends. If I'm tearing it in order to use it for something purposeful and productive, then it's an Issa D'Rabbanan because of Tikkun Keli. But if I'm just tearing it because, I don't know, I'm bored, it's absolutely not prohibited, not min HaTorah, not min D'Rabbanan. There's no Tikkun Keli, there's no Koireya. This could be another problem, mechatech. Mechatech is, if you cut it in a certain measurement, you want it to be a certain measurement. But if you're not interested in the measurement, right, you just tear off a plastic, you tear a piece of paper, and it's one piece of paper. There's no koireya because it's one guf, not shnei gufim. There's no tikkun keli, you don't want to do anything with it, it's garbage. There's no mechatech, you're not being meticulous about the measurement, it's completely permissible. Which according to this, the Mechaber and the Rambam are crystal clear. And the Baal HaTanya brings a gewaltige raya. What's his raya? There's a Tosefta in Masechta Shabbos and a Masechta Beitza. And it's brought by the Mechaber in Siman Shin Yud Dalet in Shulchan Aruch Shabbos that if you have a barrel of wine, and the barrel of wine is covered with an oir, it's covered with a piece of hide, and you have to get to the barrel, you're allowed to tear the skin of the chavis. You're not interested in using the skin. You're not doing it in a particular measure. You're just tearing it, and you're allowed to do it. It's not a problem. He says, why are you tearing? The answer is, the hide is one entity. It's one guf. It's not shnei gufim. It's the chiddush of the Baal HaTanya. Now, if you'll take a look in the Mishnah Bruras and Ishtazai Pashat, the Bir Halacha dedicates 2 pages for this. He has a lot of problems with this chiddush of the Alter Rebbe. He believes it's a contradiction to Yerushalmi. Chazon Ish also says it's a contradiction to Yerushalmi. And the Ohr Chaim, the Mishnah Berurah and Bir Halacha, comes up with a different way of dealing with this inherent problem in the Shulchan Aruch and in the Rambam. Reb Chaim Noah, in his Sefer Ktsois HaShulchan, Badei HaShulchan, deals at length with the Bir Halacha. And I think convincingly demonstrates and defends and explains the inside of the Baal HaTanya. There's a Sefer Stam on Meret Shoin. The Chemdas Yisrael in their mitzvah brings this word of the Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch Siman Shin Mem, and he says there was a Talmud Chacham Muflag. He doesn't say who. There was a great scholar. He said, I can't believe that the Baal HaTanya should say this. There's a pasuk in Parshas Tazria. When you have leprosy in your beged, right? So it says vikara. Vikara, right? If your person is not allowed, you tear off the nega, the leprosy, min ha'oir, and the word is vikara, and it's one guf. So the Reb Chaim Noah gives his own answer. The Chemdas Yisrael says this Talmud Chacham Muvlik forgot a Gemara in Zvachim Daf Tzadik Dalet that when you have a leprosy in a beged, the leprosy penetrates to the core of the beged. He says it's shnei gufim. It's not one guf. The leprosy and the garment are shnei gufim. Of course, it's karneya. It's not the same beged anymore because the Gemara says that the nega permeates, it penetrates the entire beged. I want to speculate that that's what the Chidush Harim meant. Because I don't know another place in Hilchos Shabbos. He meant this parentheses in Shulchan Aruch Harav that Koireya is only Shnei Gufim, 2 separate entities that are united and you tear them apart. That's Koireya. If it's one entity, it's not Koireya. And therefore there's no Malach of Koireya. Okay, so how does this answer the question? Why do Chazal call it Kriyas Yamsuf? And the Torah calls it Pkiyas Yamsuf. So please bear with me for a few moments. I want to go back to that Farbrengen, Yud Shevat Tovshin Mem 1980. The image was almost surreal. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was sitting at the head table. To his left was Rabbi Soloveitchik, Rabbi Yoshe. They were both not young. Rabbi Soloveitchik, the Rebbe was almost 80. Rabbi Soloveitchik was a little older than the Rebbe. Remember, they were together in Berlin in the 1930s. So it was quite an image. And when Rabbi Soloveitchik stood up after the Hadron on the 4 Masechtas, so the Rebbe stood up to bid him farewell. And those who were there remember he remained standing till Rabbi Yoshe left the shul. It was a unique display of Kavod HaTorah. He remained standing, which was very unusual for the Lubavitcher Rebbe to stand up and remain standing that way for anybody, till Rabbi Soloveitchik left the shul, and the whole olam stood up. It was very moving to see. And remember, they weren't in agreement on everything. Rabbi Soloveitchik had his shitta, and Lubavitcher Rebbe was the Lubavitcher Rebbe. They didn't see everything eye to eye, including some very important issues. But there was a tremendous appreciation and respect, and a tremendous Kavod HaTorah that night. Parenthetically, just derech agav, Rabbi Yudel Krinsky shared with me, one of the secretaries of the Rebbe, that in 1983, the students of Rabbi Soloveitchik wanted to publish a Sefer HaYovel, a Torah journal, a book in his honor. So they asked the Lubavitcher Rebbe to contribute a maimer, an article, an essay, a shir. So he wrote back, they wrote in the letter, we know the friendship that existed between the Rav and the Chabad Rebbe. So the Rebbe wrote back that he apologizes, but his minig is not to contribute essays to journals. That's the minig in Beis Harav and Chabad, so he really apologizes. But he encourages them, and he blesses them, and he thanks them. He circles the words, we know the friendship between you, between the Rebbe and the Rav. So he circles the words, and it says, we know that you knew each other, you're friendly with each other. He writes, the Rebbe writes in this letter to them, Harbe yoyse mimashe yoidim. Our friendship is far more than anybody knows. So there was an evening a few months ago in Yeshiva University about Rabbi Soloveitchik and the Rebbe. So the family of Rabbi Soloveitchik was opposed to the evening. Some people in the family, because they claimed that there was no relationship. It's just a manipulative attempt of recent years. Maybe it's one of the secrets. So one of the speakers spoke about their position, that there was nothing, they were fine, but there was no relationship. So when I got up, I said, I was always wondering, Rabbi Krinsky showed me this answer from the Rebbe, why would the Rebbe write this to them? More than anybody knows. L'maynaf geminnet to them that the relationship is more than anybody knows. So I said, maybe he knew that one day somebody's going to get up from the family and say, Lo hoya v'lo nivra. So he was saying, I just want to tell you, it's more than anybody knows, even his own Eineklach. For the record. At that siyum of Yevamis, Nazir, Brachas, Christus, because they all end with the same Marmei Chazal, Talmidei Chachamim, Marden Shalom Ba'olam. Somebody once asked the question, is there any humor in davening? You know, rabbis struggle because they want to make davening more exciting. So they have Kiddush clubs, they have cholents. Rabbi Lankry has a few jokes set up every Shabbos. Somebody asked, why is there no humor in davening? So I said, there's a lot of humor in davening. They said, where? I said, Talmidei Chachamim Marden Shalom Ba'olam. That's not a humorous statement, I ask you. But in sincerity, he addressed that Maimon Chazal in the 4 Masechtas. And there was a message that the Rebbe communicated then. It was profound, it was long, and he spoke about it another few Shabbosim after. I want to extrapolate one point of his message then, develop it the way I understood it, Lefi Ani is Daiti, which I think gives us both theological and practical inspiration and empowerment. There's a famous Talmud Yerushalmi and a Mechilta, a fascinating story, which happened at Kriyas Yamsuf that we wouldn't see at first glance. What happened at the sea, says the Yerushalmi and the Mechilta, is that the Jewish people split up into 4 camps. One camp said, Nipel Ayam, let's jump into the ocean. When you're stuck between a curve and a hard ball, you have the Egyptian army behind you, you have a sea in front of you, where do you go? There's nowhere to go. Nipel Ayam, let's jump into the sea. And let's call it quits. Kita Shnei Shein is another group said, Nachzel Mitzrayim, sometimes you have to surrender. Let's pick up the white flag and let's tell the Egyptians, okay, we're going back. Kita Shlishis, a third group said, Nitzavach Kenegdon, let's declare war, let's fight. Okay, there's Sheish Meis Rechav Bachor Parei has a great army, we'll put up a fight. We'll go down, at least let's take a few of them down. And the third group said, Nasimon Milchama, let's fight. And the fourth group said, Nitzavach Kenegdon, let's daven to Hashem. Let's pray to God to save us. How do we know there were 4 groups? How do we know? From Moshe's words to the Jewish people. Listen to his words. Moshe speaks to the Jews and he tells them 4 different messages. First he tells the Jews, Hisyatzvu uru'us Yeshuas Hashem. Stay still and watch God's salvation. Then he tells them, you see Egypt today, you will never go back to Egypt again. And then he says, Hashem yilochem lachem. Hashem will fight for you. Va'atem tacharishun, and you remain silent. Why all of these messages? Zakti Yerushalmi, he was addressing 4 different types of Jews. The group that said, let's jump into the ocean, Moshe Rabbeinu said, Hisyatzvu, stand still. The group that said, let's surrender and go back to Egypt, Moshe said, you're never going back to the Fasholtan Medina. You're never going back to Egypt. The third group that said, let's fight, Moshe Rabbeinu says, Hashem yilochem lochem, God will fight. And the fourth group that says, let's daven, Moshe says, va'atem tacharish, you remain silent. So what? Yes, you're not jumping into the sea and you're not going back. You're not fighting and you're not praying. So what do? Eat shalom. What's the next pasuk? Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, daber el bnei Yisrael v'yisol. Speak to the Jewish people and let them travel. Let them advance. Let them move on. They have a destination called Har Sinai, but there's a little problem. There's a yam. Okay, don't worry, we'll take care of that. Netei yadcha al hayam, the yam will split, I'll go through. Ask the Rebbe. So I don't understand. What's pshat nipel hayam? We're going to jump into the river. See, they were advocating suicide. The other group says we're going back to Egypt. The third group says we're fighting. The fourth group says we're davening. And Moshe rejects all 4 groups. But what's the difference between number 1 and Moshe's advice? Number 1 said we're going into the ocean, or to the Red Sea. And the Rebbeinu Shalom said travel. And why does Moshe negate davening? No praying. A Jew wants to daven. No. Lo yeis tefillah. It's not a time of davening. What's the meaning behind this? And why did Klal Yisrael divide into these 4 groups? And apparently there was no 5th, because if there was a 5th, it would have said there was 5 groups. And what was Moshe's own position? And in a fascinating hadron, the Rebbe said that the 4 groups correspond to Masechta Brachas, Yevamis, Nazir, and Krisus. Masechta Brachas captures the group that says Nipor Layam, the end of Brachas, Leich L'Shalom B'Shalom, and the whole Brachas he explained. Masechta Yevamis relates to the group of Nachzel and Mitzrayim, Drisha Chechkira, Whole concept of Yibum, Shtei Achim, Yaakov, Esav, going back to Mitzrayim, to the Netzutzes. Masechta Nazir, the end of Masechta Nazir is about war. God loyna amen yosem and amarvarech gulurayim noitzchin is the third shita. Let's make war. And Masechta Krisis, which ends with karbonis, kvasim, izim, tefillah, is the fourth shita. Netzavach kenegdam. And in all of them, the Gemara ends Talmidei Chachamim Marbim Shalom Ba'olam, which is the fifth shita responding to all four. And tonight I want to share one nekuda, one gem, and try to adapt it to our life. This medrash is not just a story of old. It's a story that occurs throughout Jewish history, including in our own generation. Because so often in our history, when we look at our future, we say, where are we heading? There's a sea in front of us, and there is the Egyptian superpower right behind us. You want to turn around, you're stuck. And you want to advance, you're stuck. And if you stay in one place, you're done. You're attacked from all sides. Especially the generation that stood up after the Holocaust. 70 years ago, 65 years ago, after Auschwitz, Dachau, and Treblinka. And the 6 million Kedoshim, a third of the Jewish people, was decimated. And the Jewish people looked ahead of them, and they looked behind them. And behind them they saw blood and ashes. Hundreds of communities that went up in smoke. 1.5 million Kedoshim at the item, little children gassed, shot, burnt. And ahead of them, they saw uncertainty. In the land of Israel, the small Yishuv fighting for its life, there was tremendous uncertainty. And in the whole diaspora, there was uncertainty. Assimilation was ravaging the Jewish people. Even those that remained strong were very much on the defensive. What is the proper way? Where do we go today? Such a hell of a Hester, such a darkness, such a concealment that was unprecedented in the annals of Jewish history. The black hole of civilization. Where do we go? How do we advance? And more or less, the Jewish people divided into 4 shittas. Now, of course, the 4 shittas have many branches and sub-branches. Toldesein, Vituldas, Toldesein, or Tzaresein, Vitzaris, Tzaresein, Atsaif Kalayla. But they can be captured by 4 different philosophies. One philosophy was Nipai Layam. Nipai Layam wasn't just resignation. It wasn't just suicide that comes from depression. He touched up then a word that they felt that it's a pchina of Yehorig Val Yaver. The commandment to go to Har Sinai requires Mesiras Nefesh Yehorig Val Yaver, and therefore jump into the sea. What does this represent in Jewish history? The Rambam defines the world of Mashiach from Yeshaya Perek Yud Aleph, Mol Oretz Deis Hashem, Kamayim Layom Mechasim. The Rambam in Hilchos Mikvayos writes that mikveh represents Mei Hadas HaToher. The water is the Gemara in Baba Kama, Eimayim Ela Torah. There's a group that says, our job today is to jump into the sea. Let's completely disengage from the world. Let's go into a mikveh and stay there. Especially if it's hot. Tomorrow's Friday. I'm using my own ISIS a little bit. And this is not a bad mikveh. It's a mikveh of Torah. It's a mikveh of Avodah. It's a mikveh of Tefillah. Nipalayam. We had enough with Egypt. We had enough with the world. Let's submerge ourselves in a sea of spirituality, of holiness, of transcendence. We'll build up artificial walls. The ghetto came crumbling down. We will recreate those walls. We will spend time in the Yam, and thus we will remain immune of the dangers of Mitzrayim, Meitzar Gvul. One philosophy. Another philosophy was very different. They said, Nachzal Mitzrayim. It's time to lower the standards of Jewish identity. And Nachzal Mitzrayim itself has so many shittas from one extreme to another extreme. But the main objective of all the shittas is, listen, we're living in a big world. What, are you going to lock your kids up? Our job is tikkun olam. Our job is or lagoyim. We must integrate with the world. And yes, it's an Egyptian world. We surrender. We negotiate. We make compromises. We lower somewhat of our expectations. We understand that we're part of the world, and that means that there's certain things you do when you go to Rome, you behave as in Rome. In one way or another. Again, in this itself, there's 900 madregas, 900 philosophies. Then there's a third shitta. I had a friend, I once told him a story. He said, without names, who was it? We have a third shitta. The third shitta says, war. Megate Milchama. That's it. That's going to be our modus operandi. We're going to fight and fight and fight. That will educate our children to fight, to curse, to hate, to denigrate, to disrespect, and that way, maybe they'll lose many. But you know what? At least they'll take down a few from the other side. Yes, you can't raise a generation and inspire a generation based on hate. What are you telling your children? That everybody else is not good? And then when your children grow up and they look in your own backyard and they see, whoa. Nasa Mulchama. But there's a message here. The message is, we're going to fight. We're not running away and we're not surrendering an inch. We're going to fight. This is a third philosophy, and there was a fourth philosophy. And the fourth philosophy is a very sweet philosophy. The fourth philosophy says, you give a sigh, and you start saying Tillim. I run the world, God runs the world. I'm responsible for the Jewish people. Was bin ich? What am I? I'm his representative. My job is, I say Tillim, I say Amisha Beirach, I say a good l'chaim. I say a geschmacke meise. I sing a geschmacke niggin. I daven to Hashem and I say, get this world out of the mess. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe conceded and he said, don't think these four shittas are bad. They're Jewish shittas. And each one has its time and space and legitimacy. And then he said a word, mit wem hat Moshe Rabbeinu gehalten, and who did Moshe agree with? And he said Moshe agreed with each one of them. Meaning, when each group came to him, he, as a shepherd, he identified with them, he empathized with them, he understood them. They say the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Zeichet Tzadik Levracha Rav Kanman. So after the war years, he used to try to go to every event that he could and speak. He was a great speaker, great orator. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe came to an event of Vishnitz in Bnei Brak. And he says, he gets up, and he says, Heinz wollte ich gewollt sein a Vishnitzer. Today I would love to be a Vishnitzer chassid, so I could fully celebrate with you. And then he went to an event in Ger, and he said, Heinz will ich sein a Gerer chassid. And what he was expressing was something very Jewish, very genuine. He really celebrated the success, the growth of all of the various institutions and communities and groups, etc., Hasidic or otherwise. So he said, Moshe identified with each group. But then the Rebbeinu Shalom comes into the picture. And what he tells Moshe Rabbeinu, Daber el bnei Yisrael v'yisol. Tell the Jewish people it's time to travel. What is Hashem saying? What's the difference between the Yisol and the first four groups? And now I feel compelled to quote Lashon Harav in Yiddish, and then I'll translate. The Lubavitcher Rebbe said that Eibishter sagt zu Moshe, as kommt einmal a Zeit, sometimes a moment arrives. Me sagt a Yidden. We tell a Jew, pack sich auf de Talis und Tfilin und geh spalt a Yam. Alts min hashamayim, even my shlom azalas. But this is more or less what Kriyas Yamsuf looked like. And we have all the 4 kittas, so it's working out perfectly. The demonstrations are outside. We tell a Jew sometimes you have to put away your talus and tefillin and go outside and split a sea. What does it mean to split a sea? What's that spalt nayam? The Gemara says in Chulin, Kol ma sheyesh bayam yesh biyabasha v'chol ma sheyesh biyabasha yesh bayam. The ocean, the sea, eclipses an entire universe that's beneath the water. We go to the ocean, we go to the beach, we take a look, all we see is water. Kamayim layam echas. But we all know that some of those locations stretch 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, 5 miles deep, with hundreds of thousands of species of amphibious creatures, of fish, of trees, of plants, of every type of mineral that's found in the ocean. A whole universe under the sea that we are clueless about because we can't see it. We're in the dry land. We could see everything. The truth appears as is. What then does Kriyas Yamsuf mean? Tosfos says in Masechta Soita that the Jews didn't even go through the Yamsuf. It was a semicircle. They went straight, the width, and then they made a right, the length, and then they came out from the same side, which is how the Lubavitcher Rosh Yeshivas explain what's Pshat Kosher Zivugim Kriyas Yamsuf, that Shidduchim are as difficult as Kriyas Yamsuf, because how many paths were made by Kriyas Yamsuf? 12. So if they went through the sea, so you have 12 paths going from one side to the other side. But if you're making a semicircle, so now you have 12 paths, right? So one path is very tiny, because you go in, you make a right, you come out. And then the other one is larger, and then the other one, and then the other one is mamish large. They said there's 12 different types of yeshiva bachrim. Right, one guy has to date and date and date and date and date till it's matzah isha matzah toiv v'yofik rotzin ma'ashem toiv. And the other one is echad shtayim shalosh, and we hope, if not, you come to Rabbi Lankry. Yid came to a Rav, he says, ich will haben a get. The Rav says, wer will nicht? That was just a joke. I once saw a Yid, a young man learning Masechta Gittin. I say, what happened? He says, on a Shalma Parms Vaseno. A woman once came to a rabbi, she wants a divorce. The rabbi says, how long you married? 40 years. Says the Gemara says in Gittin, Kol HaMegarish Ishter Yishoyim Mizbeach Murder Loved Mayas. You divorce the first marriage, the Mizbeach starts crying. She says, Rebbe, 40 years was ich wein, soll the Mizbeach weinen a bissel. It's been 4 decades that I was weeping. Let the altar cry a little bit. So that's the 12 paths. So I asked you a question. If the Jews, anyway, didn't go through the sea, so what they need Kriyas Yamsuf for? It was just God's prop show. He had to show off. It wasn't enough. Dam Tzvadei Kinem Arev. Is that the Pshat says the Balatanya that Kriyas Yamsuf was an essential prerequisite to Matan Torah. They had to go through the experience of splitting the sea. Why? Because the Kriyas Yamsuf is essentially the mission statement of all of Judaism. What's all of Judaism? Judaism says that Teva, nature, is from the word, the Chacham Tzvi says, Tubu v'Yamsuf. Teva means sunk, drowned, submerged. Because the truth is that all of the world is Einoid Mulvadai. There is Koyach HaPoyel Benifol, we are all really one. Because there is an organic, essential, divine oneness that constitutes the core of the entire universe, and we are all part of a reflection of that oneness. But when we look at the world, all we see is a cover-up. All we see is Kamayim Layam Mechasim. All we see is ego. I am I and you are you. We are fragmented. I protect my turf, you protect your turf. When I look at myself, all I sometimes see is a bag of meat and bones, blood and sinews, addicted to this pleasure or that pleasure, to this need or that need, whether it's money or covet or validation or security or some other need in the world, whatever it may be. Rabbi Rudinsky described eloquently that he doesn't believe anybody really can metamorphosize their body. So when we look at the surface, what we see in ourselves is pure, physical, often problematic, depressing material. What's the objective of the Jew? Kriyas Yamsuf. To be able to split open the Yam. Hafach Yam Leyabosha. To be able to explore the depths. The oimek, the depth of a human being, the depth of a soul, the depth of the world. Not to fall prey to the superficial veneer of reality, but to be able to be megala, the koyach hatoyel benifel, to be able to reveal the spiritual core at the essence of each person, of each Jew and of the world. Which according to this, we have a gewaldige answer to a strange deal that already the Noyam Eli Melech in Likutei Shoshana addresses. When Kriyas Yamsuf is addressed the first time, what does it say? It says, Ubnei Yisrael holchu bayabasha b'soich hayam. Makes sense. The Jews walked in dry land. Ubnei Yisrael holchu bayabasha b'soich hayam. I'm sorry, that's the second time. The first time Kriyas Yamsuf is described, it says Vayavoyu Bnei Yisrael b'soich hayam bayabasha. The Jewish people came into the Yam. They walked in the Yam, but it was bayabasha. It was dry land. The water parted. When the Torah repeats the story, it says the opposite. Ubnei Yisrael holchu vayabasha b'soich hayam. They walked in dry land in the sea, which doesn't really make sense. They didn't walk in dry land. B'soich hayam bayabasha, not bayabasha b'soich hayam. But now we understand. There's two moments of Kriyas Yamsuf. There's Kriyas Yamsuf, and then there's the aftermath of Kriyas Yamsuf. Kriyas Yamsuf was vayavoyu b'nei Yisrael b'soich hayam bayabasha. You go into the Yam and it's dry. But what was the objective? The objective was that v'nei Yisrael holchu bayabasha b'soich hayam. That even after that, when there's no Kriyas Yamsuf anymore, even today, when we're walking on dry land, and what we see, all we see is the superficial veneer that covers up God in everything and everywhere. It should be by bayabasha b'soich hayam. That even when you're walking on dry land, you should be able to have that consciousness, that awareness of b'soich hayam, of that which Kriyas Yamsuf accomplished. You should be able to see in every moment the divine opportunity, the divine challenge, the divine invitation, the message of the Rebbeinu Shalom in that moment. According to this, doesn't the Chidushei Harim's insight make perfect sense? What's the difference between Pkiya and Kriya? Pkiya, you say on a rock, on Evan, one entity, right? Lifkoyas Evan, you mishpalt ashtain, you crack, you bust open the rock, you split the rock. Boka, Yam liyabosha. The Yam is one entity. We know the difference in Hilchas Mikvoyas between water and snow. Water is considered one entity. It's all connected. And Kriyas Yamsuf created a split in the chomer, in the bruteness of the physical world, that you should see the pnimius, the koyach hapoyel benif. And that's why every day by davening we say the Shiras Hayam and we mention Kriyas Yamsuf. Why? Because the only way you could start your day, the only way you could really daven is if you come to discover what's beneath the outer layers, what's beneath the laziness, the depression, the challenges, the taivas, the addictions, the instincts, the insecurity, the fear. You have to go deeper. You have to dig. You need Kriyas Yamsuf. So Kriyas Yamsuf was a pkiya. Zok the Chidushei Harim, but once Kriyas Yamsuf happened, now Chazal will not call it pkiya anymore. They'll call it kriya. What's the difference? What does kriya mean? Shnei gufim. It's not one guf anymore. You're not penetrating one entity. It's Shnei Gufim, it's two separate things that are really separate. Elamai, they came together after the water came back. But you're not anymore separating one entity and splitting a rock. You're merely opening up and creating a partition between two things that are separate, because Kriyas Yamsuf transformed the paradigm of humanity, the paradigm of the Jewish people. Back to the Hadrin of Yud Shevat Tovshin Mem. One group says, we escape the world. Another group says we surrender to the world. A third group says we fight the world. A fourth group says there's nothing to do. We daven to Hashem. He runs the world. We are nice passive bystanders. Comes the Rebbeinu Shalom and says, Daber el bnei Yisrael v'yisol. Sometimes you have to escape. Sometimes you have to understand the other position. Sometimes you have to fight, and sometimes you have to daven. You always have to daven. But what's the calling of the Jewish people? Daber el bnei Yisrael v'yiso. You have a mission to go to Har Sinai and bring Torah down to the world and transform the world. For that, you have to split a sea. You have to be Megala, that Mitzrayim and the Yamsuf is ein oid milvadoi koyach hapoyel benifel. Don't be afraid and run away to heaven, because the one who runs to heaven and the one who surrenders to Egypt are really closer than you imagine. They both don't believe that heaven and earth can be integrated. They both don't believe that Torah is the Torah of the world. The Baal Shem Tov once said, the Gemara says in Brachas, Mishachara beis hamikdash ein lo lakadosh baruch hu ba'olamei ela dalad amos shel halacha bilvad. When the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, God has nowhere in his world but 4 cubits of halacha. So the Baal Shem Tov once said, quite a daring pshat. Mishachara beis hamikdash. What is the symptom of Churban Beis Hamikdash? How do you know the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed? That you believe ein lo lakadosh baruch hu ba'olamei ela dalad amos shel halacha bilvad. You believe that the only part of the world that belongs to God is the 4 cubits of halacha. And therefore, the world is a makam hatumah. So one says we have to surrender because there's no way you can have real Jewish pride in a real world. You have to surrender. And the other one says, away. Moshe Rabbeinu says, Daber el bnei Yisrael v'yiso. It's time to jump into the world and shpal dayam. Be megala koyach hapoyel benifel in the world. It's different than the 4 shittas. And in my hergish, he was articulating essentially what the message of the Rebbe was in those dark post-Holocaust years and for the next few decades, where we were privileged to be moved and guided by this Isha Elikim. What he was telling every Jew is, don't be afraid. What he was telling every Jew is, you have to daven, of course, but you're a shutef la'akadosh baruch hu. Don't be a passive Jew. Be an active Jew. Change the world. What he was telling every Jew is, you're not in a battle with everybody. The world is much closer than you think. The ganze Welt, ganz Klal Yisrael, is deep down yearning to put their mouth, and you're on your mouth, and declare together, Yizgado v'Yizgada Shmei Rabba. Don't surrender to Egypt. You know why? Because really what the world is asking for you is to be real, to be authentic. And you don't have to be ashamed, and you don't have to run away. With pride and dignity and humility and courage, you can go out and split seas wherever you go. And that's exactly what his mission statement to every Jew who listened was. Those of you who used to live in Brooklyn, you were lucky enough to live in Brooklyn till the mass exodus. So you know that for Tashlich, they used to go to the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens at Eastern Parkway, near Prospect Park, near the circle there, where the public library is. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe would go every Rosh Hashanah to do Tashlich there. It's a 20-minute, 25-minute walk from 770. Rosh Hashanah Tovshin Yud Zayin 1956. It was pouring rain. But it wasn't just a rain. It was a mabul. A mabul. That you would be diagnosed officially as insane to be outside, never mind to take a stroll. So the person, the shomer, the guard at Brooklyn Botanical Garden didn't think that anybody in their right mind would come visit the Botanical Garden when you just went outside. You were mamishin that you needed a teva of Noach. But of course, the guy in Brooklyn Botanical Garden didn't know anything about Lubavitch. So he left. Lubavitcher Rebbe comes with a face 200, 300 chassidim. The early years was small oilam. And he comes there, you know, Botanical Garden is a huge gate, huge black gate. And you had the Alte Yidden that was still in the city of Lubavitch by the Rashab Yidden in their 70s and their 80s. The Alte Yidden there, they walked. And they were stuck. Without skipping a heart's beat, without blinking, the Rebbe, who was no teenager at the time, started to climb. It's before my days, but I heard from Edir, he climbed like a 17-year-old athlete who's lifting weights and doing the treadmill 4 or 5 hours a day. He climbed. Within a few seconds, he flipped himself over, jumped to the other side. He said, "No." So that's it. Lubavitch went into the acrobats. Oops. Now you had the Yidden, Alte Chassidim. They all climbed. They helped them up. They went over, they did Tashlich, and then they went back. Ufaratsto Yamav Akeid Matzafayna Vanegbef. It wasn't a pasuk in Parshas Vayetze. It was a Mahalach Olam. And the Hashkafa didn't begin with the world. It began with the Jewish people. Most people understood that a Chassidish Rebbe, at best, worries about his own community, about his own kehillah. And the Rebbe certainly did. But for him it was relevant. What is the fate of a Tzahal soldier, or a mikveh in India, or a mikveh in Afghanistan, as much as a yeshiva in his own community for his own chassid? There was no such a concept of, I care for my own, and I'm segregated. I jumped into a beautiful ocean, and I fight. Ichpatiyut is a word in Hebrew, ichpatiyut. I want to tell you all my There's a yeshiva in Har Noif. Rosh Yeshiva, Choshver Rosh Yeshiva in Har Noif in Yerushalayim. In 1975, he went to visit the Rebbe. He was on the Yechidus, a private audience. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe was talking about the need to reach out, to influence, to have an impact. And they were debating a little bit. So at some point, the Rebbe looks at him and says, Chabad Shaila, I have a question. What's the most prominent limb in the human body? So tells the Rebbe, the moyach, the leiv, the heart. So he says, why the heart? Zoya says, Liba poligl chol shayfen, the source of blood, it pumps blood. It's the source of vitality. Ki nefesh habasar bedamhi. The blood is life. So we don't eat blood, we cover blood. So he says, no, who is the heart? Where is the heart? So he shows the left side. So the blood pumps the blood. He said, oh, you know how Yiddishkeit sanctifies the right side. Leiv chacham, leyaminoi. Leiv ksil, smiler. Yadcha, yadkeha, the weak hand. Yosef HaTzadik wants that the right hand bracha should go on the right. So why is it that this most prominent organ in the body is on the left side? It wasn't, it's not a question of the Ksas or the Nesivis or Chedush Rebbe Kivega. It's not in any of the Marachas. Like, to Rosh Yeshiva, what are you supposed to say? So the Rebbe looks at him and he says, you know what the answer is? The answer is, the heart is auf der rechte Seite. The heart is on the right side. You know why? You know why you were given a heart? You were given a heart to feel the pain of the person standing in front of you. And for the person standing in front of you, it's on his right side. Dein Hart is for a zweite Yid. And for the second Jew, it's the right side. Which when I heard the Meiser Rosh Yeshiva said, for me, my light bulb said, that answers the question in Menachos Lamed Dalet. The Shaila of Tefillin, Ketzat Sidron, Kadosh Vayik Kiviyach on the right, Shema Vayim Shemayim Esmoil. Frag the Gemara Vatanya Ifcha, Amar Abaya, Kan Mimina Koire, Kan Mimina Miniach, right? Depends which angle, the one wearing the tefillin, the one looking at the tefillin. So Rashi and Tosfos both explain that who do you go after? The one looking at the tefillin. So Kadosh Vayik Kiviyach on the right, if you're looking at me, on my left, you're right, and Shemush Rabbe and Ravid come and say this doesn't make sense. Why is the viewer more important than the one wearing the tefillin? I'm doing the mitzvah, and you're the one who I have to define my tefillin based on. It's a good kasha. But tefillin is shibud halev v'hamayach. V'rochal amei haaretz kishem Hashem nikra lecha. Brachas davav. Amar Rebbe Lazar elu tefillin shabiroish. And tefillin shabiyat is shibud halev. It's your right. Remember once at a Fabring in the Lubavitcher Rebbe said a vort. Very sharp vort, very powerful vort. He said, how does Golus begin? Golus begins in Parshas Vayeshev. Yosef is sold to Mitzrayim. How? His brothers sell him. Emes. But why did they sell him? How did they sell him? Reuven said, throw him into a pit. Why? Lahatziloi. Lahashivoi alav. Reuven wanted to bring him back. So what happened? Vayeshvu lecha lechem. They sat down to eat. And Reuven wasn't there. Why wasn't he there? Zakt Rashi. Reuven was shoiv. It was shoivavim. Shoivavim. He was fasting. Why was Reuven fasting? Why? Al shebilbel yitzue aviv. He took his father's mattress, took it out of Leah's tent, took it out of Bilhah's tent, put it in Leah's tent. How long before this story did Reuven do that? He did that after Rachel passed away. Rachel died when Yosef was 9. Yosef was now 17. This happened 9 years earlier. Reuven was fasting for 9 years, Rabbi. So you understand? For 9 years he was fasting. It wasn't a psa shnala bahab. It was a fast shoivavim. It was a tikkun haklali in Uman. It wasn't so simple. 9 years fasting. Why? Al shabilbel yitzui yava. You understand what type of spiritual sensitivity this man had? 9 years later he's still fasting and doing tshuva, and his brothers sit down for a suda. He can't sit down because he's going to fast. So when they sell Yosef, he's not there. Says the Lubavitcher Rebbe, listen. He says, you know how Golus begins? Golus doesn't begin by rotten people doing rotten things. Golus sometimes begins by great and holy people engaged in their own spiritual growth at the time when a Jewish child is languishing in the abyss. That's the beginning of exile. The beginning of exile is, wie kann der angehen fasten, wenn a Yiddish kind liegt in a grub? Fasting is great. Tshuva is awesome. Spiritual growth is the demand for every person. But when there's a Jewish child in a pit, how can you go away to fast and abandon this child? This is the beginning of Golus. Golus doesn't begin with lowlifes. Golus begins with great men who don't realize that God sent them to this world to change things, to bring redemption, to bring geula, to touch hearts, to affect souls, to bring people out of their pits and hug them and embrace them and give them hope and destiny and happiness and love and show them the koyach hapoel benifel within them. So the Kotzker Rebbe once said, Rabbi Rudinsky said one word from the Kotzker. The Kotzker Rebbe once said, the Gemara says in Masechta Eruvin, it's a Peladik Gemara. Those that Rav Daniel Shir probably remember the Gemara. B'shah shetikin shloima, Eruvin and Atilas Yadayim, Shloima instituted 2 mitzvahs. Eruvin, an Eruv, not in Borough Park, but in other places. Unatilas Yadayim, and washing your hands before bread. Yotza Baskel, and the Baskel, the voice of heaven said, Im chacham b'ni yismach libi gamoni. My son is so wise, my heart rejoices. Ash the Kotzer, I saw it quoted in the Siach Sarfi Kodesh. What's the chachma in this mitzvah? Eruvin netilas yadayim. That the Baskel says, such a son, I rejoice. You know when you hear from your yeshiva about your son, Psagirus, not only that he lit a smoke bomb in yeshiva, but hopefully something better than that. Yismach li bigamani, you say, you know what? it was worth going into debt to pay tuition. Sometimes you hear the telephone call, you say, Lama Zanaychi. What is it that Shlomo HaMelech did with Eruvin and Netilas Yadayim? The answer, Moirav Rabbi Yisai, is there's two types of people. There are people of Eruvin and there are people of Netilas Yadayim. The people of Eruvin are the party animals. Eruv means you mix. They're schmoozers. You meet them at receptions, at bar mitzvahs, at chasanas, at lechayims. They have what to say to everybody. First of all, they know your uncle, your aunt, your zayde, your elte baba, far de krig, nach de krig. They know any profession you're in, they know. They're the b'chinas Google. What's the muhus of Google? There's no muhus. Whatever you want, that's what I am. What are you Googling? What's the bills? I don't have a muhus. You want this? Fine, we'll Google. That's people, I call them Googles. That's their muhus, like a goggle muggle. So they mix, they like people, they don't have to, they're not so socially conscious, self-conscious, or maybe they're the most self-conscious, so they have to compensate, whatever. That you'll ask your therapist, but the nekuda is, they're Eruvin, they mix with everybody. And then you have Yidden, what's their modus operandi? Netilas Yadayim. They're always in the middle of Ashrei, Karbonis, Parshas Hamana, Seres HaDibris. You want to talk to them? You want to talk to them? This is one of the milas of being religious. When you're secular, you meet somebody in the street, you have to talk to them. By us, he's Farah bein tam, nachar bein tam, middle of a mikveh, almost mikveh. Netilas Yadayim, he can't talk to anybody, and he's always washing his hands. Why does he wash his hands? Netilas Yadayim, we all know in Simon Kufn and Ches, it's for Tara, Kedusha. My hands are clean. The bells are off. Kedosh Hashem Rabban wouldn't give shalom, you know, he had a glove. Netilas Yadayim, you keep your hands clean. Especially in business, Netilas Yadayim. There's two types of businessmen. There's an Eruvin, mit allem and handelte. For everyone, he has a handle and a plan and a strategy. He knows how to fix everybody. There was once a kehillah, they needed a new rabbi. So they put in an ad in the newspaper, we need a rav, but he should be a kolboy. He should be a master of all trades. So a guy calls up, he says, that's me. The board invites him for a meeting. They say, tell us your credentials. Okay, he says, here I go. For starters, I'm a kohen. First, I'm a kohen. Second of all, I'm a shoichet. A moil. A soifer. I'm a lamet. A baldarshan. A balkoira. A talmid chachem muflug. A therapist, a marriage counselor, a brilliant advisor. So I can do everything. I can hatch you, match you, and dispatch you. Besides all of this, I'm also a gabbai, a shamish, a manhig, and derech agav, it comes revach, chavre kadisha. So what else do you need? So one guy in the board who was still up turns to him and says, Rebbe, I have a problem. 10 minutes ago you said you're a kohen. You forgot. Okay? You can't be a board member. Fafala. You told me you're a kohen. Now you say you're Chevra Kadisha. How does that work? So I have to say it in Yiddish and then I'll translate. He says it works. Ich bin Azarov, ich leich alle bagraben lebedikeheit. I'm a type of rabbi, I'll bury you all alive. It's not a problem. I could be a kohen, I could be Chevra Kadisha. Nobody has to be dead in my watch. So you have an Eruvin character, you know, somebody who has a plan for everybody. And then you have a businessman, Netilas Yadayim. You know, everything is chash loshen harich, chash asag is gvul, avak sheba avak. You don't talk to anybody. Just hard to run a life. So how do you deal with life? And we all know the value of Netilas Yadayim. We all know the value of Kedusha, of Tara. And we all know that without real discipline, there's no Avodas Hashem. And without real Iskafia, without real restraint, there's no Avodas Hashem. The Chachma of Shlomo HaMelech in life was Tikkun Erevin and Tikkun Netilas Yadayim. He taught the Jew how to be Erevin. V'yiso, travel, go out of your cocoon, und spalt hayam, change your community, help your neighbor, reach out to another Jew, take responsibility for Am Hashem, for Bnei Yisrael, for Klal Yisrael. Don't be a spiritual narcissist. That's Golus. The consciousness of Golus is spiritual narcissism. My shleimus, my perfection. The concept of Geula is oneness. Einoid mulvadoi. You and me are essentially one. How could I turn away from you? My heart is on my right because you're on my right. Erevin. But when it comes to Erevin, it's very easy to lose your identity. The same Shlomo HaMelech was Mesakein, Netilas Yadayim. And what's Netilas Yadayim? Netilas Yadayim is to bleiben rein, to bleiben heilig. You're not there to be changed by the world. You're there to change the world. You're not there to be influenced by the world. You're there to influence the world. You're not there to fight with the world or to surrender to the world. You're there to declare the truth of Einoid Mulvadoi Vayikra Sham B'Shem Hashem Keil Oilam, says the Baal HaTanya, not Keil Ha'olam, but Keil Oilam, that Keil and Oilam are one and the same, because he was Megala, the Koyach HaPoyel B'Nifel. And that's why brachas, nazir, yevamis, krisis, it all ends with Talmidei Chachamim, marbim, shalom, ba'olam. What's shalom? Shalom you don't need when there's no conflict. Peace you need when there's a conflict. There is an inherent conflict between the world and Elokus, as Rabbi Rudinsky said. There's an inherent conflict between chitzonius and pnimius, between gashmius and ruchnius, between soul and body. But the Talmid Chacham, the Ben Torah, the mission of Torah is Marbim Shalom Ba'olam, to reveal in the words of the Rambam in the beginning of the Ada Chazaka that Me'amitas hi motzoi nimtzu kol ha-nimtzoyim v'chol ha-nimtzoyim mishamayim v'oretz u'mashe b'neim lo nimtzu ela me'amitas hi motzoi, that from his truth come all of existence. And even those negative aspects of the world are a hechitimtze to do mitzvahs loisasa. The world is a divine world, but sometimes the calling of Hashem is mitzvahs aseh, and sometimes the calling of Hashem is mitzvahs loisasa, or in the words of Masechta Yuma, chiyosoi, zui shchitosoi, shvirosoi, zui takanosoi. Sometimes you connect by rejection. The mitzvahs loisa says another heichi timtza of avodas Hashem through this object amegala lakus, by saying no. And those are the four kittas, the four mesechtas of Kriyas Yamsuf. A little Maisa. I grew up in Crown Heights, and I always wondered, the mailman used to come with 4 huge bags, probably between 300 and 800 letters a day. And the Rebbe read them and answered them. From everywhere, the whole world, Jews and many non-Jews. And the Rebbe had a minig. I heard this from one of his secretaries. He told his secretaries they're not allowed to open any envelope because of confidentiality. So he opened up every envelope on his own. Now imagine just opening 300-400 envelopes a day, and then reading them, and then answering them. So one of the Hasidim who I happen to know, his name is Rabbi Chanin, Zalman Chanin, decided, Agoinis, he's going to buy an envelope opener, an electric opener. And he gives it into Rabbi Klein, Rabbi Binyamin Klein, and the Rebbe sees it and he sends it back out. He says, Tzemach zu viel rash, too much noise. Rabbi Zalman says, Imi Shema, he calls the company, he says, you have a silent model. It's out of stock for years. And he left, nothing left. He offers a nice sum of money, and of course there's one left. There's always one left. So he's so excited. Imagine A chassid's tainug, he could ease the Rebbe's burden. I'm a chaya, the Rebbe will just put the envelope in the machine, he'll open it up. You don't have to open it, you hurt your nails, hurt your finger, get bloody. He sends it into the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and the Rebbe sends it back out. So he's perturbed, you know, he worked hard to get it, a noisy one, a quiet one. So I guess the Rebbe felt the need to explain. The first time he didn't feel the need to explain because he had he sends a message to him. He says this: different Jews seal their envelopes in different ways. There's a Jew who seals his envelope with tape. There's a Jew who seals his envelope with saliva, spit. There's a Jew who seals his envelope with some other glue or substance. But there are those Jews who seal their envelopes with their tears. Wie kann ich öffnen mit der Maschine, was ein Jid hat vermacht mit seinen Tränen? How can I open with a machine an envelope that a Jew sealed with his tears? When I open it with my fingers, I can obtain, I can absorb, I can internalize those tears. And if I ask tonight, what's a legacy, what's a message of the Baal HaYartziet and of his successor on this Yud Shevat? L'chol asher b'shem Yisrael yechuna. To every person here. Number one, ichpatiyut. You know what ichpatiyut means, Reb Moshe? To care. To care. My father, Olav Shalom, told me once, asked the Rebbe, why do you have to get involved in things that no other Rabbanim get involved? You make yourself enemies. So he told him, by Moshe it says, he walks out and he sees an Egyptian beating up a Jew. Vayifin koi v'choi, vayarki einish, vayachis amitzi vaytmeneo b'choi. He turns here, he turns there, he sees there's nobody around. He kills him, he hides him. What's pshat? He sees there was nobody around. There was somebody around. So Rashi has his pshat, other Mefarshim say differently. The Rebbe Taich, Vayifin koi v'choi, Moshe looked here, Moshe looked there, Vayar, he saw ki ein ish. There's no person who cares. There's no person who cares. Vayar ki ein ish. A Jew is being beaten. A Jew is starving. A Jew's blood is flowing and nobody cares enough. This one will sigh, this one will write an $18 check. Vayar ki ein ish. So Moshe had to make a decision. Will I be like everybody else and say nobody cares? Why should I care? Moshe said, if nobody cares, that's why I will care. And that's why he became Moshe Rabbeinu. So my father was quite taken aback because the Rebbe usually would not speak about himself like this. So, the Rebbe says, und das hab ich gelernt von Schwer. And this is how my father-in-law was. So we have to learn from him. Everything by him was the Schwer, everything was the Schwer. To care. And number two, to be able always to remember the koyach hapoyel benifel, to spalten hayam. Today we have the same four attitudes. What's our destiny? Are we going to resign? There's people who come every morning to shul and tell us how horrible the matzav is. Shidduchim, yeshivas, teenagers, disorganization, drugs, problems here, problems there, Eretz Yisrael, the frum world, everyone, there's enough crises. So what do? So this one says, Nipalayam, you just resign, you go into your own world. This one compromises, this one fights, and this one becomes a passive bystander. But the message of this great person was, Daber el bnei Yisrael v'yisol. Don't escape and don't surrender, don't run and don't become passive and don't fight. You have a mission, a shliach from the Boirei Olam, to change the world, and if you have to split a sea, you could split a sea. You see a mountain, go. go and take a step to the mountain and bring Klal Yisrael to Har Sinai, so that from Har Sinai they can march ultimately towards the Geula Shleima. May it be b'mheira b'yameinu. Amen. Thank you very much.